From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the lecture by Mr. Vogel. I believe everybody gathered here today with a hope that we can actually view the cherry blossom pretty soon. It's quite not yet, but it's coming. National Park Service announced the peak. That means 70% of the blossom will be this weekend, 11th through the 14th. So we are really excited. My name is Mari Nakahara, the curator of architecture, design, and engineering at the library's Prints and Photographs division. I also serve as a coordinator for today's program. The lecture is one of the 2015 National Cherry Blossom Festival official events, co-sponsored and co-hosted by the library's Asian division, where I worked as a Japanese specialist until this past January, and also Asian Division Friends Society. Pursuing one of the library's goals of providing general understanding of American culture, intellectual and social life, and other people and nations, we have been hosting events and programs related to the cherry blossom since 2012, when we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the cherry tree gift from the city of Tokyo to Washington, D.C. The library holds over 158 million items, covering an almost universal range of subjects in diverse formats, including resources related to cherry blossoms and their history. The library hosted, let me change the thing. Oh, I'm sorry. This exhibition, Sakura Cherry Blossoms as Living Symbols of Friendship exhibition in 2012. The exhibition and its gallery talk and then also many educational materials are still available, as you are looking at, via the library's website. Although the scale is much smaller, the library again provides an opportunity for the general public to view the library's cherry blossom collection this year. Please stop by the display, which is current on view till May 2nd on the first floor. This is the G floor, but the first floor of this building. If you go back to the information desk and you can ask where the agile case display for the south side, they can point you out. Please also note, library has one of the 100 remaining originally cherry blossom trees on site. Let me show you how it looks like. This is it. The Public Affairs Office actually cited on the Gazette. This was actually verified. In the Public Affairs Office, the Library of Congress contacted the National Park Service, and the National Park Service verified, yes, this is one of the 100 original trees. So you may want to actually stop by. This tree is located on the 2nd Street Southeast and Independence Avenue, and there's a teeny plaque saying the original tree, so you won't miss it. Now I would like to introduce today's speaker, Mr. Bob Vogel. Mr. Vogel is the regional director of the National Park Service's National Capital Region. He was named to this post in December 2014 after success as a superintendent of the National Mall and Memorial Parks. As regional director, Mr. Vogel is responsible for 700 park locations in the District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia, a $143 million budget, and 1,200 employees. More than 46 million visitors travel to the region's national parks for recreation, education, inspiration, and relaxation each year, and the National Cherry Blossom Festival is certainly one of the highlights. During his tenure at the National Mall and the Memorial Parks, he worked closely with the Trust for the National Mall to significantly advance the National Mall plan and restore the worn turf. He worked with businessman and philanthropist David Rubenstein to leverage federal and private dollars for $15 million repair of the Washington Monument following an earthquake in August 2011, and ensured protection of the National Mall's cherished space while welcoming millions of the people during historic events, including the 57th presidential inauguration and the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. On behalf of the National Park Service, he assumed responsibility for New American Veterans Disabled for Life Memorial in October 2014. Mr. Vogel began his National Park Service career as many National Park Service employees have, working summers as a ranger, leading the educational tours. Prior to his tenure at the National Mall, he served as a deputy superintendent of Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming and has held leadership positions at national parks across the country. Mr. Vogel is a native of Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and has enjoyed the outdoors and history throughout his life. He is passionate about preserving national parks and sharing them with young people. He has seen firsthand the health, wellness, and economic benefits national parks provide to people, especially in urban areas like Washington, D.C. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Bob Vogel.
Well, I should just stop while I'm ahead. It is, I'll try not to step on my hat, and don't take it if I walk out of here and the felt is better. She gave me my first question, how do you remove the spores off of a felt ranger hat? And I was not able to answer that. But I am very excited to be here today, and delighted to have the opportunity to talk just for a few minutes about one of my great passions, the National Park Service, and also my favorite time of the year, spring. And what better place to be than Washington, D.C. And you know, none of us likes to have a long, hard winter. As you heard, I moved to Washington from Grand Teton National Park in the mountains of Wyoming, and I assure you the winters are just a tad more severe than here. In fact, you know, normally there would be snow there through the month of May, but I have become acclimatized to Washington, D.C., and I, like everyone, has been complaining all winter long about how much longer can it be? But you know, I think this is a good thing, because this really brings us all into this feeling of excitement and anticipation of the cherry trees. And sometimes here in Washington, you know, people are a little jaded, cynical, and we lose our perspective, but the spring and the cherry trees help us to keep it all in perspective. So I am very excited to see this. You saw the webcam here. This is our cherry cam, which, you know, if you can't get out, heaven forbid, you can at least sit at home and see live the action around the Tidal Basin. And you can see that it was kind of sad earlier in the week when I saw driving to and from work people kind of crowded around one tree, desperately trying to take pictures. But today they are all looking pretty good, and by this weekend, not only is the weather supposed to be spectacular and we have a great parade, I think the cherry blossoms are going to be at peak, so it should be very exciting. This is, the National Park Service cares for many special places in and around the city, including the National Mall and the memorials, the White House, Rock Creek Park, and George Washington Memorial Parkway, Prince William Forest and Catoctin Mountain Parks. We have Civil War battlefields, including Manassas, Antietam, Monocacy. We have the home of Frederick Douglass and Ford's Theater, where next week we will remember the 150th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's assassination. So whether you like being outdoors, walking, hiking, jogging, biking on trails and paths, relaxing by the water with a picnic lunch, enjoying live music, or learning more about the stories of triumph or struggle, there's something for everyone in the wealth of national parks in this area. And next year, in 2016, the National Park Service will celebrate its centennial year. And just last week, we started our National Awareness Campaign. Although the idea of national parks has existed much longer than the agency that now manages them. In fact, here in Washington, our federal parklands can be traced back to the public land that was set aside in the 1790s. And Rock Creek Park is celebrating its 125th anniversary this year. The founding of the National Park Service is nonetheless a very important milestone and a moment that we have been anticipating and working toward. This centennial gives a moment to pause and reflect on our successes and to learn from our failures and to envision a future for the national parks. So we want to celebrate the past 100 years of the National Park Service, but we really want to look to the forward to the future and what should the future of national parks be. We know that these places we care for are special, they are unique, and that they are worth keeping. But in order to keep the public enthusiastic about a traditionally popular federal government responsibility, we need to continue to reach out to a new generation of park visitors whose interests and values are being shaped by the modern world, not the world of 1966 when the slogan was "See the USA" in your Chevrolet, and many families got people in their station wagons and would go out west to see the parks. That's when a lot of our infrastructure was developed in the Park Service, and we're certainly not in the world of 1916 in which the National Park Service was originally conceived. So to usher in the second century of national parks, the National Park Service is inviting a new generation to discover the special places that belong to us all. So more than ever, and don't you worry, I'm going to talk about the cherry trees, but it all connects here. More than ever, it's important that the national parks engage not only those who already know and love the parks, but again, the next generation to ensure the preservation and critical relevancy of our nation's majestic landscapes, our rich history, our vibrant culture for the next 100 years. So to aid in that effort, the National Park Service and the National Park Foundation have launched, I think, a very exciting campaign to generate new interest in the national parks, to get people to care about these special places, to feel a sense of ownership and pride. We believe it's not enough for people to know they exist just in an abstract sense. A person cannot truly appreciate the Grand Canyon until he has stood on the rim looking out over that great expanse. And you can't truly know Mount Rainier National Park in Washington until she has smelled the wildflowers or touched a cool mountain stream. People must learn to know these places in person, to actually go there and open themselves up to that experience. And 100 years ago, some of these places might have been far away, but today the nearest national park for most Americans is likely closer than you think. So the campaign done by Gray Advertising, a great internationally known advertising company out of New York, the campaign is called Find Your Park. And the idea is that everyone should and can have a special place that they can connect with. It might be a unique place far away, or it might be the place that you go to every day. It might be a big place or a small place. And it might be a place where you can hike in wilderness, or a place where you just pause for a minute during a busy day. The Find Your Park campaign is making use of web and social media to share the message and help people find their park. But it is more than that. To kick off the campaign, an interactive computer kiosk has been deployed around the country and will be coming here to Washington a week from Thursday to the National Mall. And over the next few weeks, we'll be going to cities around the country, and it debuted in New York City last week. And it's going to explore the parks in an innovative way. So you can come to the National Mall, and through this interactive kiosk, which I've only seen pictures of, but it looks exciting, you can actually explore parks around the country interactively, and you can also talk to rangers around the country at other parks too. So it's again, part of this exciting campaign. And one goal of Find Your Park is to demonstrate that parks aren't only the big Western parks that might be the first to come to mind. Even here in Washington, D.C., a lot of people are unaware of our urban parks. The campaign's going to connect people to parks that are much closer to home. Urban national parks like the Statue of Liberty, Golden Gate National Recreation Area in San Francisco, the San Antonio Missions, and the brand new Pullman National Monument on the south side of Chicago are all right inside major population centers. And these, along with hundreds of other urban parks, all make both national and local parks easy to access for the majority of Americans, because 80% of us now live in cities. Well, DC is an urban place, which I hope most of you know has an abundance of national parks. Though many people who enjoy these places may not be fully aware that they are in a national park. I think people around the world know that the Lincoln Memorial is in Washington, D.C., and they can say it's the Lincoln Memorial. But I'm frightened to say that a large percentage of people don't know that the Lincoln Memorial is actually a national park. You may have passed by or even through one of these national park areas on your way here today. In fact, there's a good probability. The small circles and squares where so many DC residents and workers commute, stroll, take your lunch, meet with friends, walk your dogs, places with names such as Thomas and Farragut, McPherson, Logan, DuPont, Franklin, Stanton, and Banneker are such a part of the rhythm of our lives that using these space here is really as natural as breathing. And on any given day, how many people travel and to from the city on the George Washington Memorial Parkway, the Suitland Parkway, the Baltimore-Washington Parkway? All of these places are national parks. How many Metro riders use the stations at Fort Totten, Navy Memorial, McPherson Square, Farragut, DuPont Circle, Suitland, U Street, our Smithsonian, and each of these metro sites delivers riders to a national park. How many joggers, bikers, and hikers explore Rock Creek Park, Theodore Roosevelt Island, or the National Mall? Each uses a national park here in the city. And a national park you may not know about right here in the district is poised for a bright future. East of the Anacostia River is a place where there is room to play, where you can explore 3.5 miles of paved path along the river, use new outdoor exercise equipment, launch a boat on the river, swim in swimming pool, in a swimming pool, play tennis, basketball, and soccer, picnic on a summer day, fish, and even roller skate in the National Park Service's only roller skating pavilion. It's all in Anacostia Park, and if that isn't enough, yes, Anacostia Park has cherry trees and cherry blossoms. Anacostia Park is a great example of how important green spaces are to an urban environment. And we are, the National Park Service, committed to working with the states of Maryland and the District of Columbia and other federal agencies in a huge effort to clean up the Anacostia River and to really make the Anacostia transform into a wonderful, incredible urban space. It's already a great space, but we're committed to working in the future with all these entities to make it better. Anacostia Park is a great example of how important green space is in an urban environment. It's hemmed in by development. The open spaces of the park are a pressure release valve that gives people room to move around. It's also an important natural refuge with wetlands that mitigate flooding and are vital natural refuges that protect animal and plant life. I believe that parks are truly essential. John Muir said in 1912, "Everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play in and pray in, where nature may heal and give strength to body and soul alike." And I believe that Anacostia Park can provide this right here in the nation's capital. Well, this year, with our partners, the 11th Street Bridge Park and the National Cherry Blossom Festival, we will conclude the National Cherry Blossom Festival with an event in Anacostia Park. The first ever Anacostia River Festival will be on April 12th, this Sunday. The weather sounds great. The cherry blossoms are going to be great, so come on over. This festival, which is free to attend, will do more than celebrate spring. It will showcase Anacostia Park's diverse opportunities with activities including art projects, boating, fishing, tours, bike parades, and more. And the goal is to expand the Cherry Blossom Festival over the Anacostia and to bring a fresh perspective to a park that has so much to offer. So I encourage you to come on over on Sunday. Well, the broad goal of the Find Your Park campaign is to help connect people with their special places, whether a far-off destination or places in your backyard like Rock Creek Park, Great Falls, and Anacostia. The true wealth of national parks in Washington, D.C. is really not an accident, and I hope that you appreciate that we have this huge concentration of national parks that any other place in America would be jealous of. This bounty of places to play in is largely due to planning set in motion more than 200 years ago by our beloved first president, George Washington. So after the war for American independence had been won, the difficult work, the real challenge of governing took its place. And after the states ratified the Constitution, the Residence Act of 1790 established the place where those of us who would govern the nation under the Constitution would gather. And this site on the Potomac River proved an attractive location for many reasons. This site on the Potomac River proved it was geographically near the center of the 13 states, and delegates from southern states found it comfortably nestled between two slave states. It was also near George Washington's home, which proved an opportunity to honor General Washington and President Washington by placing the capital nearby. But perhaps most attractively, there were few people living here other than the well-established towns of Georgetown and Alexandria, the landscape was pretty much largely a blank canvas on which a vision for America's past, present, and future could be expressed through the very design of its capital city. Well, as many of you know, President Washington hired Pierre L'Enfant in 1791 to plan the city's layout. L'Enfant was originally from France and had served the patriot cause in the Revolutionary War. And so it's not a mere coincidence that streets in Washington share a similarity with the broad avenues in Paris. And while the basic plan called for a grid of lettered and numbered streets, L'Enfant used the opportunity to develop a more ambitious plan to use the landscapes to visually represent the form of government that had just been created. So atop a hill called Jenkins Hill, he found a natural pedestal for the Capitol building, where Congress would convene. Along another ridge near the water, he found a fitting place for the executive mansion, the president's home. And then crisscrossing this very orderly grid, a broad diagonal avenue connected the Capitol with the president's home. The symbolism of separating the two buildings physically reinforced the constitutional concept of the separation of powers. And the broad avenue between them, Pennsylvania Avenue, which is also a national park, visually linked the two buildings and the two branches of government. Other similar avenues radiated out from the Capitol and the president's house. Where these diagonals intersected, circles and squares were set aside as points of interest, where future American heroes could be honored, and as they have been. And it was an incredibly vast and ambitious plan that presented a grand and optimistic view of America's future. And today, these circles and squares prominently located at the intersections of these major roads have names like DuPont and Logan, Stanton, Seward, and Lincoln. And indeed, they are all lands managed by the National Park Service, as we all know. But for his most important monument, L'Enfant reserved a very special place, due south of the president's house, due west of the Capitol, a monument to the most esteemed and beloved American, the general who led the patriots to victory and who led the nation as our first president, George Washington. And there, L'Enfant imagined that the Washington Monument to him would stand near the water of the Potomac River, just a few miles upriver from Washington's home at Mount Vernon, and symbolically located along, again, these primary grid lines of L'Enfant's city plan. Well, it would take 94 years before that part of L'Enfant's vision would be realized, a span of years in which America changed radically from that of L'Enfant and Washington. America grew, America divided, America fought, and America rebuilt. Yet after the horrors of the Civil War, as America looked to its future, Pierre L'Enfant's ambitious plan for Washington City came to fruition finally, visually and symbolically orienting America toward its destiny while keeping a firm grasp on the values of the past. The late 1880s saw many cities working toward better sanitation, improving the health of their citizens. And in the 1880s, as the newly erected Washington Monument drew Washingtonians' eyes upward to the dizzying heights of what at that time, for a short time, was the tallest building in the world, it was a major public works project was underway at the same time to deepen the Potomac River and mitigate flooding in the area. So tons upon tons of dredged up river bottom were piled up to form the land in what is now East Potomac Park and West Potomac Park, the areas that are now occupied by landmarks such as the Lincoln Memorial and the Thomas Jefferson Memorial. Yes, today, those areas that are instantly recognizable, quintessentially American vistas, a place where marchers would demand equal rights, a place where we could remember and honor our veterans, an essential place for all Americans, began really as a pile of stinking mud. But that new land, muddy and coarse as it was, provided an opportunity for a renaissance in Washington, D.C. And as 100 years earlier, when Pierre L'Enfant had a nearly blank canvas in the 10 miles square of D.C. to develop, now there was again a new area right near the center of that square to imagine something new, a muddy blank canvas, and some people set out to improve that space. It began, as many things do, with a handful of people committing themselves to a grand idea, and their perseverance and a little luck changed Washington, D.C., I think for the better. Eliza Skidmore, who is best known for her photography and journalism for National Geographic in Japan and other parts of Asia, she began lobbying for cherry trees to be planted along the Potomac waterfront as early as 1885. Skidmore's travels and journalism in Japan had exposed her to the traditional cherry blossom festivals, and she foresaw the possibilities of recreating that natural spectacle here at home. In those days, the area where the Lincoln Memorial and the Thomas Jefferson Memorial stand today were managed by the U.S. Army Superintendent of the Office of Public Buildings, a very important position. And I wish I could have found, I have a picture of the superintendent of the Office of Public Buildings. I can say this out of respect as being former superintendent of the National Mall and Memorial Parks, frequently considered in the National Park Service a very important job, but one of the most difficult jobs in the Park Service due to the public exposure and great deal of political interest. I have seen a picture of the superintendent down at the site of what is now the Thomas Jefferson Memorial, which was a bathing beach, and he had the important job, evidently, of measuring the swimsuit length of the women that were in the Tidal Basin. And I thought, well, how interesting that must have been that he had time to do that, and that was that important. But for 24 years, Eliza Skidmore, 24 years, she asked each successive superintendent to plant cherry trees on the waterfront. And for 24 years, her requests were denied. And I wonder why, but as a professional park manager, I guess, the story I have come to know is that, there were concerns about our staffing levels, as we still have today. And I believe at least one of the superintendents had said that he was worried about people climbing the trees, which we're still concerned about, and did they have enough staff to keep people from climbing the trees? And I think at one point was concerned that people were going to pick the cherries, and I think he was educated to learn that maybe these weren't actually producing cherries. But so Eliza Skidmore persevered, and frequently that's how it is here in Washington. Nothing happens quickly, and but eventually some things can happen. And in 1906, Dr. David Fairchild, an official from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, planted a test plot of 100 Japanese cherry trees on his property in Chevy Chase, Maryland. And after they proved successful, Fairchild began promoting the trees to beautify city streets. So on Arbor Day in 1908, Dr. Fairchild gave a lecture and expressed his desire that cherry trees be planted along a stretch of road at the north end of the Tidal Basin, an area known as the Speedway. And in the audience that day, Eliza Skidmore, she was there, and she must have been thrilled. So Skidmore and Fairchild became quick allies, and they set out to raise money to donate cherry trees to the city. The change of presidential administration in 1909 proved to be a turning point in their quest. The incoming president, William Howard Taft, had previously been governor of the Philippines, which as you may know, the United States had acquired as a result of the Spanish-American War in 1898. And during Taft's service there, which he described as some of the happiest and most productive times of his life, he and Helen Taft, the First Lady, had been to Japan to see the cherry blossoms. So Skidmore reached out to the First Lady, who remembered the wonderful cherry blossoms from her own time in Japan, and eagerly joined the cause. So the First Lady's interest and influence proved to be the catalyst Skidmore and Fairchild had needed. And after inspecting the proposed location herself, Helen Taft wrote to Skidmore on April 7th of 1909, and she said, I quote, "I have taken the matter up and am promised the trees." Taft had her own ideas for developing the park too, and she continued, quote, "I thought perhaps it would be best to make an avenue of them, extending down to the turn in the road, as the other part is still too rough to do any planting." Well, the trees would fit in nicely with her plan to develop areas of East Potomac Park into a space that would evoke Luneta Park, which is a famous park in Manila, in the Philippines, where she and the president again had lived for several years. So coincidentally, on April 8th, and I apologize for my pronunciation of Japanese names, but Dr. Jokichi Takamine, a Japanese chemist whose work included the discovery of adrenaline, and the Japanese consul, Kochichi Mizuni, were in Washington and learned about the plans to plant cherry trees. So the two men offered the First Lady a gift of 2,000 cherry trees in the name of international friendship. And their plan transformed into an even more meaningful official gift, which came from the people of Tokyo, Japan, to the people of Washington, D.C. Takamine Mizuni and the people of Japan imagined transplanting not only trees, but tradition. With the blossoming of the cherry trees each year, the shared experience would bind America and Japan closer in friendship. I think it's worked pretty well. The Japanese tradition of cherry blossom viewing extends back for centuries, and cherry blossoms are among the best represented subjects of Japanese art and literature. In Japan, as in Washington, the cherry blossom season is a time when other concerns are put on hold for just a short while to enjoy the flowering trees, while the blooming trees signal the hope and promise of the return of spring for many. For the Japanese, as the blossoms begin to flutter on the wind within a few days of their arrival, they also represent the fleeting nature of life itself. And I think that's part of the attraction of the flowers and the urgency of enjoying them, is the knowledge that they will not last. Well, days after the First Lady began the work to plant the cherry trees, on April 14th, the Titanic sank in the North Atlantic, and it took the lives, as many of you know, of about 1,500 passengers. And among them was Taft's and Roosevelt's close friend and advisor, Major Archibald Butt, who was returning home from a sabbatical in Europe. And the loss was really overwhelming to the Tafts, who felt as close to Archie as to one of their own family members. Well, then another tragedy. On May 17th, Helen Taft suffered a stroke, which weakened her and left her temporarily unable to speak. And her welfare caused President Taft such a great amount of worry. And she slowly recovered and was able to speak, but the misfortune of the stroke was really a severe setback from which in some ways she never fully recovered. And then another blow. With great anticipation, 2,000 of the cherry trees were delivered in January 1910. And upon inspection, the trees were diseased. You all know this story, and infested with nematodes, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture was very concerned about introducing them into the environment. So very reluctantly, the decision was made to destroy the trees, and the trees were burned on January 28th. Yet, a handful of the trees were planted on a test plot in East Potomac Park, where the Evening Star reported on January 29th, there will be an expert entomologist with a dark lantern and a butterfly net, cyanide bottle, and other lethal weapons placed on guard over the trees to see what sort of bugs develop. Wow. Well, you can imagine that this was not, it was kind of a sensitive issue, that we had this wonderful gift and we were concerned about them and we had to burn them. There might be some diplomatic issues there. So, this international gift of friendship is received and summarily burned into ash. The Secretary of State expressed deep regret to the Japanese ambassador, and Tokyo's mayor, Yukio Osaki, among others, suggested, well, let's try again. And he upped the donation to 3,020 trees of a dozen varieties. And on February 14th, 1912, these trees left Yokohama, the same harbor that the United States Commodore Matthew Perry entered to open diplomatic relations with Japan in 1853. And the trees arrived in March, and in a small ceremony on March 27th of 1912, First Lady Helen Taft and Japanese Viscountess Iwachinda planted the first of these cherry trees on the north side of the Tidal Basin. And as the trees took root, so did a tradition of viewing the cherry blossoms in Washington. Upon its completion, the Tidal Basin was used for many purposes in addition to cherry blossom viewing. Again, the bathing beach that I talked about, located where the Jefferson Memorial is now, was in use from 1918 to 1925, and that was right next to an adjacent campground in Potomac Park. The site for the Jefferson Memorial was chosen in 1937 as the southern anchor in the north-south axis with the White House, crossing the east-west line drawn between the Capitol and the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Memorial near the center. And today, of course, we closely associate the Jefferson Memorial. As you can see when we had the Earth Cam, right around the Jefferson Memorial, that's where a lot of the staging is for the Cherry Blossom Festival, and people take thousands of photos of the cherry trees near the Jefferson Memorial. But again, there wasn't a Jefferson Memorial at that time, and when word was announced of the location of the new Jefferson Memorial, what frequently happens in Washington happened. Not everyone was excited about it. And people talk to me about the Eisenhower Memorial, which we're still working with to get final approval of it. And there's been lots of controversy, and people say, Bob, it's so controversial. And I said, well, just follow the history of everything on the National Mall, and every single monument and memorial has, I think, a proud history of great public engagement and controversy, and ultimately everything, including the Washington Monument, were controversial, but eventually most of them become very beloved. But when they proposed to put, I think my favorite story of, I guess because I've been superintendent of the National Mall, one of my favorite stories of the cherry trees is when they proposed to put the Jefferson Memorial at this location. There were some cherry trees there, and some society matrons were very upset about that, and they expressed their outrage to the White House, and they chained themselves to the trees. And I think, how would I deal with that today? But so eventually President Franklin Roosevelt, again, decided on the location of the memorial himself, and he promised, and it was promised that the trees would be transplanted, not cut down. But I think in great Washington style, it was decided that the removal of the trees would be done at night, so as not to get a greater public outcry. I don't know. I've tried that, and there are people out there watching at 2 a.m. I digress for a second, but when we were testing the lighting for when the scaffolding was on the Washington Monument, we tested the lighting at about 2 o'clock in the morning for about 5 minutes, and we had about 25 press calls by 7 a.m. the next morning, and you really did know that nothing is secret in this town. Well, anyway, the public outcry went away, and the Jefferson Memorial was put into place. And as word got out about the beauty of the cherry trees, more trees were planted and more people came to see them. And another notable gift was in 1965 when Japan gave the United States 3,800 trees to honor Lady Bird Johnson and her great beautification efforts. And these trees were planted around the Washington Monument and throughout the Capitol. And the first Cherry Blossom Festival was celebrated in 1935. And 80 years later, as you can see, it is still going strong, and a few of those original trees are still here. The trees survive because of the care that they receive from the National Park Service. And our tree crew is a small but very dedicated group of professional arborists who maintain thousands of trees throughout the National Mall, East Potomac Park, West Potomac Park, and the other national park spaces in downtown Washington. And pruning is really the most important task that they perform. Training young trees with a modified leader system and this helps to create the scaffold branching from the scaffold branching form that they maintain in the older trees. In addition to watering and fertilizing and treating wounds and controlling pests and disease, the tree crew works to mitigate the effects of soil compaction, which is probably one of the greatest threats to them, and that's caused by frequently due to heavy visitor foot traffic. So that's one of our biggest concerns. The tree crew works to keep the trees healthy and looking their best, not just for this signature season, but for the millions who seek their shade in the summertime and soak in the colors of autumn and watch for signs of spring to emerge next year. And then in the springtime, the people can feel a sense of renewal as they keep the tradition of cherry blossom viewing, or as the Japanese call it, hanami. Along the Tidal Basin, the twisted, gnarled trunks of those cherry trees, some more than 100 years old, some planted in recent years, they tell a story of perseverance. And as their limbs have arched upward toward the sun, their roots have clung tenaciously to the earth. beaten by withering summer sun and vicious winter wind, through hurricanes and blizzards and sometimes earthquakes, they have endured. Their twisting limbs reach for the light and beckon those who walk among them to go just a little further, to linger among the trees just a little longer. The tips of each twig play nature's drumbeat, keeping the rhythm of the seasons. The pillowy flowers give way to lush leaves and shade, and then blaze red in the autumn before finally going bare, waiting to announce the important arrival of spring the next year. All the while, the rhythm of life continues around the trees. Cars race by, jets streak across the sky. Marine One bears one president and then the next and the next over the treetops. And as the pace of life has seemed only to speed up, these trees have remained a constant that we can return to. They are a continuous well of inspiration, renewal, and hope that Washingtonians have passed down from one generation to the next. So imagine all of those who have walked among these trees over the years: lawyers, politicians, policemen, garbage men, salesmen, laborers, farmers, nurses, soldiers, students, the young, the old, the leaders of tomorrow. All the while, these trees have stood as silent witnesses to it all. Times of war and times of peace, times of plenty and times of want, times of harmony and times of discord. And each spring, the blossoms return, reminding us that time marches on, that every moment is fleeting, and that there's always hope for the future. The trees endure because Eliza Skidmore never gave up on her dream to see cherry trees in Washington, and because of people who are willing to work to make that dream a reality. The trees endure because we are still willing today to do the work to preserve them, to protect them from disease and harsh urban conditions. It takes hard work and perseverance. It takes patience and care. This is an effort that is bigger than employees of the National Park Service. It takes all those thousands of people who come here to be protectors of these trees too. They don't have to be tree surgeons or park rangers, but they can do little things that add up. Take photographs, not flowers, admiring the trees but not climbing them, and most importantly, sharing the experience with friends and family so that they too may know the joy of this very special season, and to forge the enduring memory of sharing that experience together. That, I believe, is the true gift of these trees. They remind us of so many things: hope, renewal, the passage of time, and the transitory nature of life itself. But they also have a strong silent power, a gravitational pull that brings people together. It is a power that transcends language and race, a power that affects both young and old. To experience walking among the clouds of blossoms on those fleeting, magical spring days is to experience the sublime. And as it warms our spirits and gives us hope for the future, it connects us to our past, to all those who have made it possible for us to enjoy this moment. We do not owe it to those in the past to care for these trees we have inherited from them, but we owe it to those who would inherit the trees from us. For us in the National Park Service and as a nation, the work does not end with the cherry trees. We must also care for the other places Rock Creek, Anacostia, Manassas, Antietam, and every pocket park in the District of Columbia, in addition to Yellowstone, Yosemite, and the Grand Canyon, for they are all special places, places worth finding, places worth exploring, places worth preserving, so that next year and the next year and the next year, people can keep coming back to refresh themselves in each park's unique experience, to find themselves, to find each other, and to make their own traditions, to pass down from one generation to the next. So it has been, thank you very much, and I appreciate you all coming to hear me today. And I did want to introduce Anne McClellan, who is sitting here, and she is taking notes, which frightens me, because she literally not only wrote the book, she has written several books on the cherry blossoms, and books that I refer to, and always put both of them on my coffee table every springtime. And she is incredibly knowledgeable about the cherry blossoms. And so I open it up to questions, and I'd like to ask if I can't answer the questions Anne can, because she knows where every single cherry tree is in the metropolitan Washington area, I am convinced. So, but she's a wonderful friend and a wonderful supporter of the Cherry Blossom Festival and the National Park Service. And anyway, it's great to be here, and if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to.
I was wondering, I may have missed, you said the second 3,000 that came in the 1960s in honor of Mrs. Johnson. Where were they planted? Or
They were planted, Anne may know specifically, they were planted around the Washington Monument, and then what I saw throughout the Capitol area. So that's
dispersed?
right.
When was the cherry tree that's by the Jefferson Building put there? Do you know?
Well, I believe that has been documented as to be one of the original trees.
But in other words, it was originally put there, or was it one around the Tidal?
It took them several years to plant all 3,000. So they planted, not quite the 3,000 on Tidal Basin, but it took them a couple of years to plant them. So we don't know exactly when that one went into the ground. But it is from that original gift.
I'm going to go out and look at it in a minute. Yes.
About how long will one of these trees live?
The average life expectancy is about 50 years, we found, in this environment. But again, we have some trees that are 100 years old.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Every year when I go down to the Tidal Basin to see the trees, there are always people who are breaking off branches. It drives me crazy. I don't know if I should say anything or not, so I just don't. But I'm wondering if this harms the trees in any way. Does it leave them open to disease or infection or anything? I heard you say that you prune them regularly, and I'm hoping that takes care of it by making a clean cut or covering the ends. I don't know how to do that. But my real question is, when people break off branches, does that harm the trees?
Well, it certainly can, and I'm not saying that every time someone breaks off a branch that it necessarily will lead to disease, but it certainly can. And so and of course, if many people do that, then it does cause damage to the trees. And so that's one of the great challenges is that we get so many people, and really the vast majority of people are very respectful to the trees. And I've seen parents, telling their children who are very excited to climb them to get down, and other people talking to people about why it's a bad practice to do that. It's also against the law, but I think we try to focus on caring for these resources. So it certainly is not a good practice. And that, again, is our biggest challenge, is the huge numbers of people and their impacts upon the trees. But the biggest factor, again, is the compaction of the soil. So, one of the, and it's impossible, and it's possible at times even to stay on the sidewalk because there's so many people, but trying to, as much as possible throughout the year, not just the Cherry Blossom Festival, to keep people to stay on the walkways as much as possible around them to protect their roots. Yeah. Go ahead. Here,
One question, how does one mitigate the effects of compaction of soil? And B, I was wondering if someone could speak to the symbolic nature of the blossoms themselves.
Well, the best way to, we can till the soil and things, but the best thing we can do is to keep people off of to control the crowds and to keep people on the walkways. And recently we made some, working with the Japanese government, improved the area around the Tidal Basin and the historic stone lantern there, and we worked closely to redo the walkways and in a way that we could bring people in and accessibly bring people into the stone lantern, but trying to make sure that we keep the flow of patterns away from it's a particularly fragile area there, and to keep people away from the roots. So, I mean, it's kind of a challenge. I'll let maybe Anne, if you would. I hate to put you on the spot, but.
No, well, I think you handled beautifully the symbolism about the trees and their blossoms being harbingers of how brief life is and how wonderful spring is. If what you're asking is what do they mean to the Japanese, they are the Japanese consider them the sort of the people's flower. The chrysanthemum is the national flower because it's associated with the emperor. But for the regular people, it's the cherry blossom. And I think there's a wonderful quote. If you want to know a true Japanese, look at a cherry blossom in the setting sun. And that notion is that you want to live your life in a way that you're ready for whatever comes, and when you have a challenge, you meet it with your full, everything you've got, and you hopefully succeed, and then if it means the end, then that's it. You want to be present fully in your life, and give it your all, and then when it's time for your petals to fall, then do it gracefully and float away. I think one of the things that's most lovely, we were talking about it earlier, is when the trees, when the petals fall, because all the petals fall at the same time. Each variety is different, but whenever the variety is due to have its petals fall, they fall. And I think that's almost as magical as when they're blooming.
It is.
Honestly, but it has, and it's close to that. It's just beautiful to live your life the way you need it. Does that help? Thank you. And thank you, Bob.
Oh, no, thank you. Yes, sir.
Could you talk a little bit about the varieties, and is there early and late bloomers, so to speak? Is there a range?
Well, there's about, and Anne, I'm sorry, you're more knowledgeable. There's about 12 different species that we have here. The Yoshino cherries, which is the species that's out here, is the most common one around the Tidal Basin. And they tend to be a fairly early blooming species. And then we have, let me see here, I've got a few notes here. And the Akibono, they're interspersed among along the Tidal Basin. And there's about 104 of those, but the Yoshino, there's about 2,000, close to 3,000 of those. And there's the Kwanzan, which is the double white flowers, and okay, yeah, please.
So the Yoshino is, you're right, is the dominant one, and the Akibonos are interspersed, and they tend to bloom slightly pinker. So if you're looking at the trees and you see, ooh, that looks pinker, you're not crazy. There are some that are pinker. This is around the Tidal Basin. The Okane are blooming now, around town. They're early bloomer. You asked about the First Lady, which is a new introduction developed by the Arboretum, and it's derivative of the Okane. And that's got a lovely pink flower, and it's a tall tree that they're trying to Arboretum is trying to develop more trees that are up,
So you don't hit your head.
yes,
Right.
because people have smaller yards. You know, Yoshino needs a lot of space. I don't remember all the others. The ponds bloom a couple weeks later. They have 30 petals on each bloom. And so they've been planted next to sidewalks and roadways because when that petal drop comes, it's just this wonderful swath. But those are the three main ones in this area. Thank you.
Just let me add, I don't know if you were here at the beginning, that Library Congress actually owns 11 illustrations of the original trees that we received. If my understanding is correct, the 2 of them are really similar of the 12. So the National Agriculture Department couldn't figure out which was which. So it concluded to 11. Dr. Swingle, when he went to Japan, that he asked Funatsu, the grown-up, to illustrate these 11s. So we have actually exhibition, small display on the first floor. Unfortunately, we couldn't show the originals because we showed in 2012. Library has a strict regulation that we can't show many times. But we actually assembled 11 illustrations, so you can see which one is which. And they really features color and everything.
Beautiful little
Beautiful
watercolor
illustration.
drawing.
And you can see all of these on the website exhibition, online exhibition.
I just had one question about the pruning. When I see those trees, they look like very natural, going this way, that way, and go, different ways. What type of park service do the pruning with? Does it help for more flowers, or does it help, like that lady said, picking up or prune? Pruning is what type of pruning you do, and what do you do with those pruned limbs? Do you plant them somewhere else?
Well, you can. You can plant cherry trees from seed, but they don't typically. It's challenging, and then they're not necessarily guaranteed to look like the parent tree. So we do take some cuttings off the trees and help with propagating new plants. And the goal is to help to keep them in shape, and then also to help in producing the maximum number of flowers. So we don't want them to look totally, overly pruned, but they are indeed, that's a key part of the process for them continuing to look the way they are and part of the care of them.
You don't cut the branches which can, affect the path or something like that?
We try not to. Sometimes we do, but if you're walking around the Tidal Basin, you'll see that's one of the challenges that 6'2", not that I don't know they're there, but people have to, I'm talking and people are getting ready to run into a tree, but we try not to do that, and that has been a little bit of the challenge on the Tidal Basin, trying to make sure that it's safe for visitors, and occasionally we do some pruning for safety purposes, but generally we try to keep most of those low-hanging branches there because they're so
Because
incredibly
we had to
beautiful.
cut the prunes of the next door lady, which I donated as a cherry blossom tree for her. But it was coming to the path, and then it was hurting people walking on the sidewalk. So we had to cut those branches. I felt so bad. I wish I could have made more plants out of it. I didn't know that. So we had to cut
It's an art to propagate them.
Oh, okay.
Or I think it is. Maybe it's not that hard for other people, but I think it's somewhat challenging.
Looks very nice though.
Last question?
Just one last question. During World War II, did the trees bear any of the signs of any kind of still willow during that time period?
I'm delighted that you were.
I know. What happened was the night of Pearl Harbor, I forget whether it was 4 or 6, but not more than that, were cut down, and they were considered to be the choicest trees. And people were so upset that they formed citizen bands to protect the trees, so they would patrol the Tidal Basin at night for the duration of the war. They called the trees the Oriental cherry trees for the war, and then really very quickly after peace was achieved, the Japanese were back, and it was in 1954 that they gave the stone lantern. That's not that long after the war ended. That's a great question.
Well, thank you so much for coming here, and thank you, Anne.
Well, let me quickly tell a couple of things that, well, National Park Service, actually Library of Congress, has maintained a long-term history. One of the examples is the Historic American Building Survey, which actually was kicked in 1933. But this time that by inviting Mr. Vogel to talk, and then I feel as a person of the library employee, we could create a new path and a new opening of the library and the National Park Service friendship and a relationship. And please, once more, let me note that a small display upstairs, and then don't forget to look at the 100-year tree behind of the Schwarzen building. And please join me again to applauding the Mr. Vogel.
Oh, thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.